Good morning, everybody. This is Justin Wagner. I'm starting my first podcast here. I've got a guest in to talk about a variety of different topics. Today will be part one of a three-part series with my guest, John Fresh. Today's topic will be about gratitude. It'll be about talking about how that applies to different parts of our life, different ways that we can appreciate things daily, as well as the bigger gratitude things that exist out there. So, but I wanted to start off today first with, as I prepared for this podcast, I found a couple different quotes out there. So I wanted to share one of the quotes that I thought was important. That sets, says a lot of important things to me as an individual, as a great reminder for me, something that I need to continue to incorporate every day to help me be reminded of how important it is to be grateful. So Zig Ziglar said, "Gratitude is the healthiest of all human emotions. The more you express gratitude for what you have, the more likely you will have even more to express gratitude for." I definitely find that to be true in my life. The moments that I have spent a lot of time being grateful, taking those moments of when I've had some successes and been grateful for that, understanding that I'm only part of that success. It's not about me individually, tends to lead to more things to be grateful for, and whether that's family successes within work and so forth. So I thought that was an important quote that I wanted to share with you. So with that, I want to introduce my guest, John Fresh. I've known him for over 40 years. We went to kindergarten together, and we've lived in different parts of the country. We've stayed in touch. I moved away, and that he moved when he was in his 20s, and he's lived all over the country. So we've always been able to stay connected, have a lot of conversations like this. Even when we were younger, we had conversations that were always tended to be meaningful. So welcome. Thanks for joining me today, and I wanted to just take this opportunity to give you the floor and introduce yourself to the audience.
I am John Fresh. I'm a chiropractor in New Jersey. I've been in healthcare for over 15 years now. Part of Justin and my life together, we were very involved in exercise, playing basketball. Justin played football. We always worked out together, and we had other friends who we'd go to the gym with. So it was always a big part of our life. And so as my life went on, looking through it through gratitude glasses, there were some things in my life that injuries happened. And at the time, I thought it was one of the worst things that could have happened to me, loving being active and loving exercise, and not being able to do that for a year, and being not able to basically do anything. I was laying on my back for a year, got a back surgery, felt a little bit of relief, but was in the same boat no more than 2 years later. So to have that taken away from me was one of the biggest things I did for happiness or for peace, or that would make me feel good about myself. And to have that taken away was a pretty big deal. Not to know that it would actually lead me to a bigger deal, which was becoming a chiropractor, learning how to take care of my back and my body, and having that lead to a better, more healthy, active life. But in addition to that, and more importantly, all the people I'm able to help because of what I learned, who are experiencing what I experienced. And looking back, I couldn't have drawn it up any better.
Yeah, it's I obviously know your history and know about those specific issues and challenges that you went through, and I think if people, and some of the people like my kids who know you now, don't know all that history that drove you here, and they see just one snapshot of you, didn't get to see that process, which was very interesting. I'm grateful for you being in my life, because it gives me a variety of different things. It gives me the ability to have conversations with someone who wants to dive into some of these topics that we don't necessarily know if we get any answers out of it, but just being able to have the conversations are as as important as having that realization. We do fortunately have some realizations individually. Sometimes those are similar realizations, sometimes they're not. But I'm grateful for you being in my life and staying in my life over the last 40 years, so we can continue to kind of enjoy this journey through life. And I do think that your story is an example of not just how to be grateful for those things, but there are other examples that we'll touch on in other podcasts that I think people can take away from your story. So in our last conversation, when you interviewed me, we talked about simplification of life, and one of the things that I talked about was being self-aware, and that for me is one of the earliest or most important things you need to understand about yourself to start to simplify your life, so you can minimize the number of things that in your life that are important and that matter to you. So with that though, there's still that you still have to understand what those motivators are, what inspires people to do what they do. So my question to you is, what are those things? What are the things that motivate you, or what are the things that inspire you every day to get up and do the things that you do?
I think as I've gotten older, or at least to the point that I'm at in my life right now, today is my greatest motivator, and knowing the opportunities and potential that a day holds. So many times, I wouldn't say my motivator was my past. It was almost an anchor. And I think it may have been a little too much on the future, where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. But really, tomorrow is never here. It's always today. So it was never a lasting motivator, because today was the day that you had to do the work to get where you wanted to go tomorrow. So my motivation is just today, and knowing how powerful a day is, and knowing all the opportunities that are available. And I just enjoy everything I go through in life, and just gathering resources to go through a day better. That just pumps me up.
That could be a whole nother conversation that we could have about how much time is wasted by people who disproportionately focus on the past or the future, and don't spend enough time on the present. It does allow for things like gratitude to be more readily available if you are present, because without that being present in today, things only can be reflected on, or you can be hopeful for things to come for the future, but you're not in that moment of saying, wow, this is happening right now, and I have to be grateful for this, whether it's just a simple sunrise, or an experience you're having with an individual, or experience that you're having with your kids, things like that. So I totally get that, and I will say that that's one of the things that I've definitely taken away from our conversations, is how to become better at that. So we've all fallen victim to disproportionately spending time in the wrong area and not being present. So when you read different books, whether they're motivational books, spiritual books, different things that lead you to whether it's listening to podcasts or YouTube videos, you're looking for these different inspirations at times. And one of the things that led me to have this topic in particular is because you hear a lot about how important gratitude is, and very successful people, very spiritual people will talk about gratitude and how important it is. And I think that that's something that is obviously an individualized answer, but there is a commonality between all of that, all these people saying that it's important. So I wonder why is it so important to you?
When I hear gratitude, I also hear humility. And I think they're very closely tied to understand that nobody gets to where they want to go without something or someone else helping them along the way. I mean, there isn't that much difference between who the greatest person in the world you think and who the least person in the world you think are, because both were given everything they have. Just one decided to take more advantage of it than the other. It's not like they had something that the other person didn't have. So everything really should involve some level of gratitude. I was just out on a bike ride, and I was oddly enough doing a stretch and looking at a city upside down and looking at the water, as the sky, because I was looking through my legs, and I was just thinking, wow, how about gravity? So without that, what would be held together without gravity? I mean, did you make your heart? Did you make your lungs? Do
Right.
do you tell them how to breathe? Did you make your capacity to learn and read? You just utilized them. So really, I mean, there's a lot more to be grateful for than there isn't. It's just really the only difference with people is, like I mentioned before, is their willingness to be grateful enough to maximize what they've been given.
Yeah, and I think that the difference sometimes is almost like there's three different groups, right? There's people who are not appreciative and are not grateful, are not aware sometimes that they should be. Then there's sort of the next group of people that are grateful, but they sort of passively grateful. But I think the real people who maximize things are the people who are active in that gratitude. The quote I saw that sort of highlights that was from JFK, and he said, "As we express our gratitude, we must never forget the highest appreciation is not to utter words, but to live by them." So it is important, I think, to say those things that are important, the thank yous and appreciations and things to people. But what are you doing then to apply that day to day? I think is sort of a difference maker, and you can see that within people. When you're talking about, what kind of organizations are they a part of to give back, and that is just a continuation of that gratitude, right? So. So with that, what are some of the things that you do every day to be grateful? What are some of those action steps that you take?
So in the morning, first thing I do is I read Bible verses and try to just understand what's been done for me and the opportunities that I have available through relying and being grateful for something bigger than myself, and the opportunities I have to serve people as part of that. I also really think there's a big connection with moving the body and being healthy for the body and the brain, just to give yourself a positive outlook, because I think gratitude really requires you to look for it. And I believe that in most situations, if you were to try as hard as possible, and sometimes you really have to bend the realities of time and space to find it, but there is always a perspective that leads to gratitude, even in some very devastating situations, because I think sometimes we forget, and it's not a saying that I usually like, that people use at times, but they say things could always be worse. Not one of my favorite sayings, because it could, be what it is at the same time, which is another one of not of my favorite sayings. It is what it is.
Right.
So, so I just think participating in the process and being aware of it, I think it's a skill, just like many other things are, to be able to find gratitude in situations. And without a doubt, gratitude is the ingredient that does soften and lift up others as well. I mean, it's not just something that you get to feel. I mean, the impact it has on others is equally important.
Yeah, I think that you touched on something there that I have definitely explored myself a lot of, which is the ability to work on it as a skill. And part of that has to be, whether that's when do you make time for it, how do you make time for it, because we can sit here and say, well, there are clear situations that come about within the day, within your life, that clearly require that gratitude. But I think that there's a real opportunity every day to find those small things, those little things that you can be grateful for. And whether that's taking a moment to thank, the individual, or the bigger picture, to allow for that to be something that you work on and you become more and more aware of it, so that way you can actively participate in that process more frequently. So I'm interested. It was interesting for you to say it's a skill, because I believe a lot of people don't think of that. It's just sort of, most people think of it just as a reactionary thing to an action, and then it ends there. But if it's a skill, then you're also looking for, how do I give back? How does it become, this perpetual motion thing, right? So
and they say that people take less time at what they're not good at and take more time at what they are good at. So if you are good at not being grateful, then being grateful is going to be awkward until you spend the time to be
Right.
good at it, and then
Sure.
it becomes a little more natural to see that as you move through your day.
Yeah, I was just recently talking to my kids about how to take positive things and try to turn them into, or negative things and turn them into positive things. And sometimes that is, for me, a way to verbalize gratitude. So, for example, if I've had, my boss gives me a project that is going to be challenging, and we both know that it's going to be challenging, whether it's managing an individual or a situation or whatever it is. I could sit there and say, oh, this is going to be tough, and we both know that it's going to be tough. But what I verbalize is, and sometimes it's a little tongue in cheek, but it's meant to be that way because we do know that it's going to be a challenge. But it's what I say to him is I thank him for the opportunity to grow as an individual, as a manager, whatever the case may be. We both chuckle a little bit because he knows that, I do think that way, but at the same time, let's be honest, this is not going to be easy, and it's going to be a challenge, but I might as well look at it from that perspective, because I will grow from it. I know that going into it, so why not look at it from that perspective? So it was a great, hopefully, teaching lesson for the kids. Whether they apply that or appreciate that or not, that's up to them. So what are the things that you think that you get out of it yourself? This sort of, not just being grateful, but then trying to project that or continue that downstream, either with your family or within your church or within work as well.
I feel gratitude puts me in a position that that you're not alone, right? If you're grateful, that means there's something else participating in who you are and helping you along. So I think for me, it sort of relieves stresses or anxieties that can come along with thinking that I have to do everything and control everything and spin all my plates myself. And so with gratitude, I feel like all I need to do is whatever's right in front of me in that state of gratitude, so that I'll be able to do that one thing better with that correct perspective. That's just in, I guess, the details of doing things, but I think much bigger than that is, even with those closest to you, because somehow there's an inverse relationship between trying to give gratitude to people you want something from and giving gratitude to those closest to you and that you love the most.
Yeah.
And how messed up is that?
I know it's a, there's a lot of times when you listen to these these words from beyond wherever that is, whether that's a book or again somebody else's podcast, and you're like, oh, I follow so and so, and they really inspire me, and they generally say the same words that the people closest to you have said 10 times, and for whatever reason you're listening to them in a way that you should be listening to the people closest to you. I think that's a lost opportunity that I think being more aware of allows for you to be grateful, not just for the message. You were looking for that and you got that message anyway, but why not get it from the people closest to you, and then that allows for that gratitude for that individual to go up, and it just enriches that relationship because you appreciate them in a way that for whatever reason you were unwilling to, because you wanted to hear it from somebody that you don't know that somehow you define as successful. So it is interesting how there's this sort of inverse situation happening. So, is there anything specifically right now that you say is like what you're most grateful for?
Wow. Most grateful for. I think, yeah, I mean, it's a question, asked during this time. I mean, if we're gonna be around, we're in the Easter season, so I think somebody dying for me so that I could be free from my past and see them in my life each day and know that I have a place to go when this is all over in a blink. That's sort of my highest level of gratitude, and I just think that filters down in Jesus's philosophy on life, that that there's an actual roadmap that when practiced, I really do see the fruit of what I read. So I'm just grateful that there's just a way out there beyond the A plus B equals C. Beyond all that, underneath, I'm glad there's a way that no matter what the situation is, that if I love, I'm going to get something good out of it. That if I am compassionate, I'm going to get something good out of it. If I'm a better listener, if I'm more caring. I'm very grateful that I have foundational concepts that can be applied to anything that could happen in my life, and know that I'll be comfortable with the outcome because I applied something that is a foundation of who I am and what I believe.
Yeah, I when I wrote that question, I did expect you to answer that, which I thought was important for there to be, I think, not just a record of it, but a reminder that there are these things that happen, and okay, this is a seasonal thing, but really, for you, I know you well enough to know that just doesn't happen for you on Easter Sunday. That'll happen next week. It'll happen when we go surfing. It'll happen all the time for you. And I think that I wanted you to express that because we all lose our way from time to time, and forget those important parts of it and say, well, that's just I'm more appreciative this time of the year, this time of the day, or when the reality is those kind of goes back to the conversation we had before, which is if you stay focused on those things that are most important to you, that gratitude can kind of stay there. Might need work, and might need for you to have some sort of practice and that you do every day, that like with prayer, to remind yourself of what those things are that are important to you, and get the words from the Bible to remind you of what those things are. And it doesn't change from season to season, but we do kind of lose our way. And I think that it's important to remind ourselves that those things really don't change seasonally. Right. We just happen to be in the Easter season, right, when we're having this conversation. So
and I think it's important that with gratitude or any of these things, that it's just something that isn't just a concept like you're saying. It just sort of becomes an expression. So, and sometimes in the growth of things, you're given situations that it's harder to express your beliefs.
Right.
So that's the beauty of life. A lot of people don't necessarily want those things to happen, and I'm not, necessarily somebody who does want that to happen every day of my life, but I do understand and am grateful for the opportunity that it provides to go to a level in that area that you couldn't have went with what you already know, with what you already do.
I think that's something that people, play it safe sometimes, right? They say to themselves, well, I don't want to offend somebody or push somebody's buttons this way or that way because it might alter their relationship or put that person in an awkward situation. And I think that when you look at, it kind of continues to go back to what we're talking about here, which is gratitude isn't something that is just words. It's action. It's what are you doing toward that? And sometimes that is not the goal every time, but sometimes that will be there'll become some conflict or some friction there but that's part of the process for you. It's part of the process for the other person, the other situation. So that's the only time you really get growth, right? Is when you're going to have that sort of friction and challenge.
Right, because it could take a week for the gratitude to come out. The first thing could be go off blast.
Right. Right.
Then just calm down. Then think about the situation. And sometimes I don't know if it's stories I make up to get my heart into a certain place, but if somebody cuts me off on the road or something, or you're just thinking about people in general. You never know how their day started. You never know what happened in their day. I mean, they just want to be just as happy as you. They want to be just as loved as you. They're just a human being underneath it all. And, what you see on the surface is sometimes just a scared end of their rope person just trying to get from A to B. And you were just right there when it happened. And there's, an opportunity to, maybe gratitude wouldn't be compassion may be a better word for it. But, it can come from maybe a gratitude of where you are and the comfort and peace you have in that day that you could be able to share and make somebody's day a little better.
Yeah, I was going to say that it may not, like to your point, that specific example is much more about compassion, but you then have the ability to be grateful to have that opportunity that presented itself, even though that required compassion in that moment. You can be grateful later. So, okay, well, the only last thing I wanted to end with is another quote that I found. Wayne Dyer, who was somebody who he passed away a few years ago. He's done a lot of motivational, inspirational work. I think the first time I saw him was on a PBS special, and I wanted to use this quote because it talks about a little bit about process, but it also touches back on some of the other things we talked about, which is sort of the more you do, the more you get. I was listening to a PBS special. I don't remember if it was, I believe it was New Year's Day, and as I mentioned in the last podcast, I do a lot of reflection at the end of every year and think about what do I want to do moving forward. In this particular year, I decided to donate a lot of money to the PBS because he was doing this special. His words meant something to me at that moment. I can't recall specifically what the topic was, but it meant a lot. And we weren't in the position at that time to give a lot, but we gave probably more than my wife wanted me to give at that time. But within a week, whatever I gave was actually given back to me. I think it was 5 times over, if I remember correctly. And those are types of examples of, I was grateful for the inspiration he gave me in that moment. I then gave something, and then I got something in return without any and it came from work, and it came from totally different direction. So there wasn't any sort of, well, I hope I get some interesting tote bag from PBS for this. So the quote is, give yourself a gift of 5 minutes of contemplation and awe in everything you see around you. Go outside and turn your attention to the many miracles around you. This 5-minute-a-day regimen of appreciation and gratitude will help you to focus your life in awe. So I wanted to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank John for joining me today. And have a great day, and go out and be grateful for everything that we have. Thank you.